My best friend stole my fiancé and my dream wedding, so I used my role as their wedding planner to audit their entire life and reveal their fraud in front of the altar. I held the heavy cream-colored invitation in my hand, the gold-embossed letters mocking me. The union of Vanessa Thorne and Mark Reynolds. Mark was my fiancé 6 months ago. Vanessa was my maid of honor. They didn't just have an affair, they had a hostile takeover. Vanessa didn't just want Mark. She wanted my life. She wanted my connections, my social standing, and specifically, the $200,000 wedding deposit I had already paid at the Pierre. When the scandal broke, Vanessa played the victim, claiming I was neglectful and that Mark had found true solace in her arms. My social circle, fickle as always, shifted their gaze to the new it couple, but I didn't cry. I didn't post a rant on Instagram. I did something much more effective. I called the venue and the vendors. I didn't cancel the bookings. I told them I was transitioning from bride to lead wedding consultant. I told them I would be the one paying the remaining balances. I was going to give Vanessa the wedding of her dreams and the audit of her nightmares. Vanessa was shocked when I reached out to offer my services. I played the role of the bigger person to perfection. I sat across from her at La Durée, sipping tea and nodding as she gushed about her vision. "Chloe, I know it's awkward, but nobody knows my taste better than you," she said, her eyes gleaming with a victory she hadn't earned. "Since you already paid the deposits, it would be such a waste to let them go, right?" "Of course, Vanessa," I said, my voice like silk. "I want everything to be exactly what you deserve." She didn't realize that by letting me manage the vendors, she was giving me total access to her financial disclosures. To book the high-end security and the international floral imports, I needed her and Mark's proof of funds. They thought they were showing off their wealth to me. In reality, they were handing me the map to their bankrupt souls. As I began auditing the proof of funds Mark submitted, I noticed a recurring line item: consultancy fee, Thorne Holdings. Thorne Holdings was Vanessa's father's bankrupt textile company. Mark was an investment banker at a top-tier firm. He wasn't just dating Vanessa. He was using his firm's client accounts to launder money into her family's defunct business to keep her Socialite lifestyle afloat. He was embezzling from his own clients to buy Vanessa's engagement ring, a ring that was originally supposed to be mine. I sat in my home office, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes, and I smiled. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a crime scene. I began a separate file on my encrypted drive labeled Exhibit A. Every floral arrangement, every bottle of vintage Krug, every silk ribbon was being paid for with stolen money, and I was the one keeping the receipts. 3 weeks before the wedding, Vanessa called me in a rage. "Chloe, the orchid shipment from Singapore was flagged by customs. Do something." She was spiraling, her perfect life showing cracks. The stress of maintaining a lie was starting to wear on her. She was demanding more and more expensive additions: a Swarovski-encrusted aisle runner, a celebrity DJ, a caviar bar that cost as much as a small house. "Don't worry, Vanessa," I said, calmly typing into my ledger. "I'll handle the customs issue. We just need to sign a few more authorization forms for the wire transfers." I sent over a digital document for Mark to sign. Tucked inside the fine print was a disclosure of liability clause. By signing it to get his orchids, Mark was legally confirming that he was the sole authorized officer for the accounts being used. He was signing his own confession, thinking he was just buying flowers. I organized Vanessa's bachelorette party at a private villa in Cabo. I made sure the champagne was flowing, and the guest list included her most gossipy friends. I didn't drink. I watched. By 2 a.m., Vanessa was drunk on power and tequila. "Mark is a genius," she bragged to the group. "He found a way to make the firm pay for our honeymoon in Bora Bora. He calls it corporate research." I wasn't the only one listening. One of the friends was a junior associate at Mark's firm who had a grudge against him. I didn't have to say a word. I just made sure her phone was recording the toast. Vanessa was so busy being the center of attention that she didn't realize she was handing out the evidence. I wasn't just auditing the money, I was auditing the secrets. A week before the wedding, Mark cornered me at the final dress fitting. Vanessa was in the other room complaining about a hemline. "Chloe," he whispered, looking stressed, "the firm is asking questions about the Thorne Holdings transfers. I need you to misplace some of the vendor invoices for a few weeks, just until the wedding is over." He was sweating. He knew the walls were closing in. He thought he could still manipulate me because I had loved him. I looked him in the eye, my face a mask of sympathy. "Mark, I've already moved the files to a secure folder. Nobody will find them before the ceremony. I promise." I didn't lie. The secure folder was a direct link to the firm's compliance officer, set to auto-send at exactly 4 p.m. on the day of the wedding, right as they were supposed to say, "I do." The wedding was the social event of the season. I had curated the guest list to include the very clients Mark was stealing from. I wanted them to see exactly where their lost investments had gone. I wanted them to sit in the pews and look at the $50,000 floral arch paid for with their children's college funds. I also invited a very special guest, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who specialized in white-collar crime. I told him I had a lead on a Socialite Ponzi scheme involving a high-profile wedding. He was more than happy to attend as my +1. The trap was set. The ledger was full. The only thing left left was the reveal. The morning of the wedding, I arrived at the Pierre with a sleek leather briefcase. Vanessa was in a state of high-octane panic. "The veil is too long, the lighting is too warm," she screamed at the makeup artists. I just smiled and handed her a glass of water. "Everything is perfect, Vanessa," I said. "Today, everyone is going to see exactly who you and Mark really are." She took it as a compliment. She actually thanked me. She hugged me, the woman she had betrayed, and told me I was her true sister. I felt nothing. You don't feel anger for a data point. You just wait for the calculation to finish. The ceremony was breathtaking. The music was a haunting string arrangement of a song Mark and I used to love, a final, subtle jab he was too distracted to notice. As Vanessa walked down the aisle, her silk train trailing behind her like a white lie, the room was filled with the elite of New York. Mark stood at the altar, looking like a king who hadn't realized his castle was built on sand. I stood at the back, checking my watch. 3:55 p.m. At the firm's headquarters, the compliance officers would be opening the secure folder. At the SEC, the tip-off I'd filed weeks ago was being processed. The officiant reached the part of the ceremony everyone knows. "If anyone here has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence was heavy. I didn't stand up, I didn't scream. I didn't need to. At that exact moment, every guest's phone in the room buzzed simultaneously. It was a push notification from the Journal, the breaking story I had helped draft. Headline: Reynolds Embezzlement Scandal. The $200,000 wedding paid for with client cash. The murmur started in the back row and moved forward like a wildfire. Mark's biggest client, sitting in the third row, stood up, his face purple with rage. He didn't look at the bride. He looked at Mark and shouted, "You son of a bitch! Is that my money on the ceiling?" The audit had begun. The transition from a wedding to a raid happened in less than 60 seconds. As the murmur of the guests turned into a roar of accusations, two plainclothes officers, men, I had met with 3 days prior, stepped from the shadows of the floral pillars. Mark didn't even have time to finish his vows. The look on his face when the handcuffs clicked. Over his tuxedo sleeves was a mixture of cognitive dissonance and pure, unadulterated terror. "Mark Reynolds, you are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering," the officer stated, his voice booming over the string quartet, which had finally stopped playing. Vanessa was frozen, her hand still clutched in Mark's, her mouth open in a silent scream. She looked at me, standing at the back of the room with my arms crossed. And for the first time, she saw the auditor, not the friend. The clients Mark had invited were no longer guests. They were victims. Mr. Sterling, no relation but a man of immense power in the city, marched up to the altar and snatched the vintage Krug bottle from the nearest table. "This is my daughter's trust fund you're drinking," he bellowed. The hotel security, acting on the emergency notice of asset freeze I had pre-filed with the venue's legal department, began closing the doors. No one was allowed to leave with the favors, luxury gift bags that contained $500 watches. Everything in that room was now proceeds of crime. I watched as a waiter took a plate of beluga caviar away from Vanessa's mother. The audit wasn't just on paper, it was a physical reclamation of stolen wealth, while Mark was being Mirandized at the altar. The second phase of my plan was unfolding across town. Because I had the power of attorney over the vendor payments, I had been able to track the consultancy fees back to the source. Thorne Holdings, Vanessa's family business, was currently being raided by the FBI. Vanessa's father, who had been sitting in the front row looking like a proud patriarch, suddenly received a text message. He turned a shade of gray that matched his silk vest. He realized that by accepting Mark's laundered money to pay for his daughter's wedding, he had inadvertently opened his entire bankrupt empire to a federal forensic audit. The Thorne legacy was being liquidated before the first course was served. Vanessa finally found her voice, but it wasn't the voice of a socialite. It was the screech of a cornered animal. "Chloe, you did this. You're just bitter. You're jealous that he loved me more." She began tearing at her $20,000 veil, ripping the lace from her hair in a fit of hysterics. "Vanessa," I said, walking slowly down the center aisle as the guests parted like the Red Sea. "Love is a sentiment. Embezzlement is a statute. I didn't make Mark steal. I just made sure he kept the receipts. You wanted the wedding of your dreams? Well, here it is. The world is finally seeing exactly what you're worth, which, according to my latest balance sheet, is negative $4 million. By 6 p.m., the Thorne Reynolds joint account was frozen. This included the money for the honeymoon, the down payment on their new Fifth Avenue penthouse, and even Vanessa's personal slush fund. She tried to pay for a car to take her away from the hotel, but her black card was declined. I stood in the lobby as the hotel manager, a man I had tipped heavily for years, approached her. "I'm sorry, Ms. Thorne, but since the primary account holder is in custody and the funds are flagged, we cannot allow you to take the wedding dress or the jewelry provided by our partners. They are technically unpaid inventory now." In front of her remaining friends, Vanessa had to change into a tracksuit provided by a sympathetic maid. The Socialite had been audited out of existence. In the holding cell, Mark tried to do what he always did: negotiate. He offered to give up the names of his associates in exchange for a call to me. My lawyer took the call on speaker. "Chloe, please," Mark pleaded, his voice sounding hollow over the line. "I did it for us. I was going to pay it back once we were married. I just needed to get ahead. If you drop the vendor fraud claims, I can get the charges reduced. We can still have a life." "Mark," I replied, "you didn't do it for us. You You did it because you're a mid-level banker with a high-level ego. And as for our life, I've already moved my personal belongings out of the apartment. I suggest you use your one phone call to find a public defender. My hourly rate for consulting is now far beyond your reach. The next morning, the tabloids were merciless. The New York Post ran a photo of Vanessa in the tracksuit with the headline, "From Vera Wang to Wearing Wrong." The social circle she had spent years cultivating vanished overnight. The friends who had been at the bachelorette party were the first to give anonymous quotes about her extravagant and suspicious spending. I sat in my office watching the Thorn Holdings stock price hit zero. I had already moved my own investments into the firm that was destined to acquire their remaining assets. I wasn't just the auditor, I was the beneficiary of their ruin. I had turned their betrayal into a diversified portfolio. 2 weeks later, I sat across from Vanessa in a sterile deposition room. She looked haggard, her designer tan fading into a sallow yellow. She was trying to sue me for intentional infliction of emotional distress and breach of fiduciary duty as her wedding planner. My lawyer simply laid out the ledger. Ms. Thorne, your wedding planner, was the only person actually paying the vendors with legitimate funds which she is now clawing back as a primary creditor. You weren't a client. You were a beneficiary of a crime. We're not here to talk about your feelings. We're here to talk about the $150,000 you spent on a fake charity auction that was actually a kickback for your father's debt, Vanessa's lawyer whispered in her ear, and they dropped the suit 10 minutes later. I organized the auction of the wedding assets. The Swarovski runner, the silk drapes, the unopened cases of Krug, all of it went on the block to reimburse the clients Mark had defrauded. I bought the emerald earrings Vanessa had planned to wear. I didn't want them because they were beautiful. I wanted them because they were a trophy. Every time I looked at them, I would remember the sound of the handcuffs. The Thorne family mansion in the Hamptons was the next to go. I watched the sold sign go up from my own deck nearby. The people who thought they could replace me were now being replaced by a state-mandated liquidator. I sat on my balcony, a glass of wine in my hand, and my ledger finally closed. Mark was facing 15 years. Vanessa was living in a studio apartment in Queens, working as a junior receptionist under an assumed name. Her father was in a minimum security facility that was still far too good for him. I looked at the final line of my spreadsheet. Balance restored. I wasn't the scorned woman the city expected me to be. I was the woman who had audited the elite and found them bankrupt. I picked up my phone and called the Pierre. I'd like to book the ballroom for next year, I said. Not for a wedding, for a celebration of the Sterling Foundation for Financial Integrity. And this time I'll be the only one in white. 6 months after the wedding raid, my name had become a whisper of fear in the boardrooms of Manhattan. I didn't return to the social circuit as a guest. I returned as a consultant. I founded Sterling Integrity Partners. My niche was specific. I was a corporate bounty hunter. Companies hired me to find the Mark Reynolds in their ranks before the SEC did. I wasn't just looking for missing money. I was looking for the lifestyle creep, the hidden Thorne holdings, and the mistresses paid for with company cards. I had turned my heartbreak into a forensic scalpels, and business was booming. Mark's trial was short and brutal. Without the Thorne family's influence to protect him, since they were busy fighting their own fires, he was sentenced to 12 years in a federal facility. I received a letter from him, written on grainy yellow paper. He tried to apologize, claiming he had lost his way, trying to be the man he thought I wanted. I didn't reply. I filed the letter in a folder labeled liability admissions. He still didn't understand that I never wanted a man who could buy the world. I wanted a man who could own his truth. Vanessa had vanished from the headlines, replaced by the next scandal. I heard rumors she was living in a basement apartment in Astoria. Her once pristine reputation, now a digital stain that prevented her from getting any job involving trust. One afternoon, while I was exiting a high-end boutique on Madison Avenue, I saw a woman hovering near a rack of discounted scarves. She was wearing a faded coat and shoes that had been resoled poorly. It was Vanessa. She didn't see me, but the way she touched the silk, with a mix of hunger and grief, told me everything I needed to know. The audit had taken more than her money. It had taken her identity. As part of my consultancy, I was tasked with liquidating the final frozen assets of the Thorne estate to pay back the remaining victims. Among the items was a storage unit in New Jersey. Inside, I found the dream wedding, decor that hadn't been used, thousands of custom-made candles, boxes of personalized stationery, and the Swarovski-encrusted aisle runner. I stood in the dusty unit, looking at the remnants of a lie. I ordered it all to be donated to a local theater troupe. Their dream was now just a stage prop for a play about greed. A week later, Vanessa showed up at my office. She had to get past 3 layers of security to even reach the lobby. She looked older, her face devoid of the expensive fillers and treatments she used to rely on. "Chloe," she said, her voice raspy, "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to ask for a loan. Just $10,000. My father needs a specialized lawyer for his appeal, and the state-appointed one is a hack." I looked at her from behind my mahogany desk. "Vanessa, you're asking the woman you betrayed to fund a defense for the man who helped you do it? That's not a request. That's a calculation error." I have nothing left, she snapped, a flash of the old Vanessa returning. You took everything. You humiliated me in front of everyone I ever cared about. No, I corrected her, opening a digital file on my tablet. You took everything from yourself the moment you decided that my life was a suit you could just step into. I didn't humiliate you, Vanessa. I just published your truth. If you want $10,000, I'll give it to you, on one condition. She leaned in, hope flickering in her eyes. Anything. Sign a full confession regarding the shell companies you helped. Mark set up in 2022. It will put the final nails in your father's partner's coffins, and I'll pay the $10,000 directly to the victims fund in your name. You get to do one honest thing in your life. Vanessa stared at the document. Signing it meant she would be admitting she wasn't just a clueless girlfriend, but an active participant. It would end any hope of her own social rebranding. She trembled as she picked up the pen. She looked at me, and I saw the realization hit her. She was finally being audited by her own conscience. She signed it. The ink was the final period on the Sterling Thorne saga. I used the consultancy fees I earned from the Thorne liquidation to launch the Sterling Financial Literacy Program. We focused on young women in finance, teaching them how to spot the golden boy, red flags, and how to build their own wealth without relying on a Mark or a Vanessa. I was no longer the girl who got left at the altar. I was the architect of a new standard. My social circle was smaller now, filled with people who valued transparency over pedigree. 5 years passed. I was invited to speak at Mark's parole hearing as a victim witness. I stood in front of the board and told them that while Mark had paid his debt to the state, he had yet to pay his debt to the truth. He looked at me from across the room, and for the first time, there was no charm, no manipulation, just a profound, empty silence. He was denied parole. The audit, it seemed, was still ongoing. I returned to the Pierre for the 5-year anniversary of the wedding audit. It was the venue for my foundation's annual gala. I stood on the balcony looking out over Central Park, wearing a simple, elegant black dress. No emeralds, no Swarovski, just the quiet weight of a life built on solid ground. I checked my phone. A notification popped up, a new lead on a hedge fund manager in Greenwich, who was overperforming his peers. I smiled. The ledger was open, the pens were inked, and the world was full of people who thought they could outrun the numbers. Let's get to work, I whispered to the night air. Hope you guys enjoy the story. Tell and comment and write your age.